So, gentlemen, we have something a little bit different. Today, IGN is critical of something. Now, usually, this company tends to, they tend to glaze AAA studios. And the reason that they tend to do this is because of access journalism. But for some reason, this one is critical. And I'm getting bored of every PlayStation game telling the same story. Now, I think there's a problem across the board with awful storytelling. And I don't think it's exclusive to PlayStation. But let's see what this guy's got to say.
I'm a huge fan of PlayStation's first-party offerings. They've come to embody the sort of cinematic adventures.
I just want to point something out quickly. In almost every case, if the main social platform is Blue Sky, the person behind it usually they don't tend to have the best takes, you know. But I'm gonna keep an open mind. I will.
Come to embody the sort of cinematic adventures I've always looked for when sitting down with a controller in my hand, feeling like genuine blockbuster events meant to be savoured. But where in the past this brand of glossy storytelling felt like new ground being trodden, I can't help but feel that recently it's become the well-worn road. It's not just that all of PlayStation's major releases adhere to the now trademarked third-person cinematic stylings. It's that the stable of developers has become seemingly obsessed with stories that explore the exact same themes, grief and revenge. And I'm starting to get
I feel like those two things are different. And here's why. Grief is almost essential to building characters, because if you don't have grief, then the character is just bland and boring. Right? So grief is like, if you want to build a story and build characters, you almost always want to incorporate grief to some extent. And the reason you do this is because almost every person, like in the real world, has experienced grief. So by incorporating grief into character stories, it's kind of relatable, right? And I think that's essential to grabbing people's attention. And in terms of revenge, I do think it is a cliche. Like, it is absolutely a cliche. That part, I do agree. Like, in The Last of Us, it's in 2, it's all about, you killed Joel, I'm going to hunt you down to the ends of the earth. And it's the entire story, right? In Assassin's Creed Shadows, again, it's all about this group of like guys, I guess, who killed the I don't think it was her dad. I think it was like her grandma or something. I don't fucking know. I didn't play it for too long, but I'm talking strictly from the girl's perspective. It's all about revenge again. And Ghost of Yote is also about revenge. You killed my parents and you tried to kill me. I'm going to kill like all of you now. So that part I do agree with. But I don't agree that the correlation between grief and also revenge is intertwined. I think these are two completely different things.
little tired of it. As a rule, these games are all impeccably well made, but I'm starting to miss that era when PlayStation's range felt wider and things were a little bit more fun.
Just quickly, the reason games now tend to be kind of similar is because of the budget, and because the budget of games today is so high, it means they can't take the risks that they could, like, 20 years ago, to where a game could cost like a couple mil, 2 mil, 3 mil. But today, it's like, 20 million, 100 million. It's harder to take that risk. So that's partially why games can feel a bit... I've already seen this before. But in terms of story, I do think devs could do a better job. For sure.
The realization that so many PlayStation games have explored the same grim story themes struck me when playing through Sucker Punch's new Ghost of Yotei. While I thoroughly enjoyed it and admire its consistently exciting approach to combat and genuine sense of discovery it creates for exploration, I couldn't help but feel I'd been told its story before. As Atsu, you're tasked with avenging the death of your parents on a blood-soaked journey across 17th century Japan, as you hunt down each of the Yotei 6. Not only is this tale unfortunately close to the plot of Assassin's Creed Shadows, which I also played to completion earlier this year, but it's the same combination of fiery revenge arc, crossed with meditations on what it is to grieve, that has become something of a hallmark for PlayStation Studios in recent years.
I'm sorry it came to this.
In recent years, if we think about games that came out in recent years, God of War Ragnarok, that wasn't about avenging anybody. That game was all about trying to find answers for your son. And you have to find the God of War, I think his name's Tyr, is that it? And along the journey, you're constantly being interrupted by the gods to try to prevent you from it, right? I don't think like the game is about avenging anybody. In terms of the prequel to Ghost of Yotei, Ghost of Tsushima was all about stopping the Mongolian invasion. Again, it weren't about avenging. It was about preventing and protecting. Let's see. God of War 2016 was all about scattering the ashes of Kratos' wife, and they have to make the journey to the place of the giants, right? And scattered it there. Let's see. What other games came out for PlayStation? Like, you got The Last of Us 2, which, is about, I'm going to kill you because you killed my dad. Kind of dad. Right? Yeah, sure. What else is there? I'm trying to think of exclusives rather than... I can't think of any more exclusives off the top of my head.
The wolf.
2019's The Last of Us Part 2 is an obvious trailblazer, with Ellie's dark descent into a rage-filled embodiment of revenge coming as a result of the death of her father figure Joel.
Keep in mind, people hated how Joel died in this game. People hated this shit. Right? So I do think this is a fair comparison. This one is actually a fair comparison to Ghost of Yotei. But outside of these two, I can't really think of one to tie this whole premise to PlayStation.
That, of course, was the sequel to the 2013 original that explored how Joel struggled to cope with the death of his own daughter. At the time, The Last of Us was seen as fueling a wave of sad dad games, including 2018's God of War. But in hindsight, these were just the building blocks for PlayStation's preoccupation with grief.
Find your way home. You are free.
2022's God of War Ragnarok is a story fueled by the loss of mothers and sons and the anger that comes with them. Insomniac's Spider-Man series follows both Peter Parker and Miles Morales as they attempt to overcome supervillain threats, as well as wrestle with their demons stemming from dead parental figures.
She never thought about herself, even when she was struggling to breathe.
2020's Returnal.
This is an exclusive to PlayStation. This is exclusive to Marvel, right? well, I don't think it's exclusive to Marvel, but they're pretty guilty of using this premise for sure. So again, how is this tied to PlayStation?
2020's Returnal is a looping sci-fi nightmare born out of the protagonist Celine's familial grief-related trauma. And then there's 2025's other big PlayStation exclusive, Death Stranding 2 on the Beach, which may not technically be a first-party game, but certainly is a verifiable feast of maternal and paternal anguish. Don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of all the games listed above, each singular in its depictions of characters and each offering wildly different gameplay experiences. But when viewed as a whole, it's easy to hear that their stories are all being sung from the same hymn sheet. Familial grief is at the centre of all of these stories, and while I certainly feel
yes, again, because that's how you build an interesting and relatable character. You incorporate grief. But outside of grief being present, these stories are not the same. The characters are not all the same. And a great example, I think, is actually Claire Obscure. Claire Obscure has a yes, there is an aspect of avenging Gustav because he's killed by the old guy. I forgot his name. But the story itself is about trying to stop the number from dropping every single year because the people of the island keep dying at that specific age. So it's like, again, Claire Obscure has grief. It's got a lot of fucking grief, but it's a really good story because the devs were competent and grief isn't the problem. Competency is the problem. How the story is told is the problem.
Feel that mature themes have a place in games, it is all starting to feel like I'm getting hit around the head with the same ideas at this point. The cycle of violence is in very real danger of becoming a loop of diminishing returns.
You gutted my father.
He defied Lord Saito.
But that can be said for every genre, though, right? Like platforming. I'm just tired of jumping all the time. Well, yeah, but that's kind of the premise of platformers. It's, to jump. I'm tired of Call of Duty using guns. Well, that's the premise of Call of Duty. It's to use guns. So it's like, this can be used in every genre. I'm not really understanding the video. I'm really not.
Then you tried to burn me alive.
Of course, it's true that not every PS5 game follows this pattern. Astrobot isn't an exploration of generational trauma in deep space, but you...
This is your best example, Astrobot? Well, yeah, because it isn't a story-driven game. It's a platformer. You play as some blue PlayStation thing. Like, why would they have grief in a platformer like this when it doesn't have a story? This is the best example? Really?
Catch my drift. I think that's incidentally what I enjoyed so much about Team Asobi's Ode to PlayStation of old. With its joy and colour standing out from the otherwise morose crowd. It felt like a rarity, but it never used to be this way. The PS3 gave us Naughty Dog's Uncharted era, which, although it eventually ventured into more melancholic territory in A Thief's End, firmly planted its flag in themes of adventure with a tone ripped from the pages of Pulp Fiction.
So what was the premise of the older Uncharted? Let's see, in Uncharted 2007, this presumably came out on the Xbox or on the PlayStation 3, right? 2007. Nathan Drake's grief is implied through his backstory, particularly the loss of his mother and abandonment by his father. 2009. Moments of grief like feelings of his past with Elena and betrayal by Flynn. See, 2011. His childhood with his connection to Sully, father figure, the loss of... So, like, he's just wrong because the older ones are also built on the idea of grief. Like, his example, again, is wrong.
I've always had a soft spot for Insomniac's Resistance and its World War II/sci-fi warfare mashup, as well as Little Big Planet, which, all the way at the other end of the tonal spectrum, celebrated creativity and community.
Welcome to Bunkum Chummy Chum Chum, where the sky is...
But by his but I'm not understanding this. Like, according to him, Claire Obscure isn't a creative game because the story is built around grief, right? Either I'm really dumb and I'm not understanding this, or he doesn't really know what he's talking about. I don't know.
Strewn with circling clouds of imagination.
Yes, these games all contain varying levels of character nuances, but were all fundamentally about different things. Treasure hunting, alien invasions, and personal expression. They weren't all trying to serve the same story, and I can't help but feel that if a new Jak and Daxter game were to come out today, it would...
But God of War is about killing things inside the world of, like, the gods, right? It's also taking down the gods in Ragnarok, and Ghost of Yotai is in Japan around the time of the Goku era, right? And so it's like those stories aren't exactly the same. The premise of the games isn't the same. The only correlations that you're drawing is grief. But these games have grief as well. What was it? This game has grief.
would be about an Otzel's thirst for revenge against the killers of his blonde-haired friend.
Hang on, Dax, it's gonna be close!
I hope that future PlayStation exclusives can look to this more varied, interesting past for inspiration, even when choosing to tackle more serious subject matters. Team Ico's PS2 classic Shadow of the Colossus took on a mournful tone, but found something truly unique and poignant within it, at a time when such ideas were far less common in games. It stands as a unique masterpiece to this day, telling its tale through vagaries and minimal cutscenes, a far cry from the trademark cinematic style we now expect of PlayStation games. What we didn't have back in the mid-2000s were 5 more PS2 releases that took its exact...
I do think this is a criticism I agree with. I think games today, including PlayStation, are going too much into the cinematics. I do. Like, I play a game to play games. Story is nice. Characters are nice. But if the entire premise of a game is not gameplay, then why am I buying a game? I've got films to watch. So, this is a criticism I agree with. I do think PlayStation and all devs have to calm down on fucking cutscenes.
Contemplations on love and loss and told the...
And by the way, God of War isn't cutscenes. The stories and characters are told are told and explained as you're traversing the world. And that's the way that, if you're trying to build a story and characters, that's how it should be done. God of War 2018 was really good at doing this. And I do hope games can start to do that a bit more often. But the problem is, I do think devs today are... they don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Same story in a different wrapping. Every time you played something new from Sony Studios on the now 25-year-old console, it felt like a brand new experiment with a different story to tell, not just a variation on a theme. That brings me back to Ghost of Yotai, a game that is superior to its predecessor in almost every aspect, barring its central story.
My name.
I will say, I do think the story of this is definitely, is 100% is not as gripping as Tsushima. I was gripped instantly inside Tsushima, right? The character of Jin and his uncle, the invasions of the Mongols, I was immediately interested. I didn't really care about this character or this game, or the game story. And in terms of the game being superior, I feel like it's not. The gameplay, like the combat, is pretty much identical to Tsushima. The only difference is instead of having a stance, you get like a spear, a sword, a dual sword, etc., which are just like soft replacements of the stance system from Ghost of Tsushima. So I feel like this game's combat hasn't really changed much. And I would go as far as to say, I think it's gone a step backwards because stances aren't always used in games. I can think of like 2 games to where stances are used. But switching between like a spear, a sword, dual swords, almost every game has that. So like a part of me thinks combat has gone backwards. But I will say about this game, I do think it's a better thing now, to where, alright, a big problem in Ghost of Tsushima was every time you cleared out a Mongolian encampment, the boss was always the same. A golden knight guy using a curved sword and a shield. That was every camp. This game, I will say, it does have way more things to fight. The problem is they don't... almost all of them feel kind of samey, with the exceptions of the mainline bosses. So, again, I think some parts, I agree, are a step forward. But to say that this game is superior in every way except the story, I don't agree. I really don't. But this could be a hot take because I've heard people praise this game in the same way. I guess I'm just the unpopular one, right? Right, guys?
Is Atsu.
While I connect to Atsu more than I ever did Jin Sakai, she's a much warmer presence to spend a few dozen hours with. Ghost of Tsushima's narrative explores different, fresher ground. The story balances the personal struggles of Jin against the backdrop of an...
Guys, I'm going to be honest. Sometimes, alright, in almost all cases, opinions are subjective. Sometimes I think you're just wrong. In what world is the character of Atsu more engaging than Jin Sakai? The story of Jin immediately is gripping. The story of Atsu is, it might improve, right? Maybe. Like, yeah, I mean, yeah, her parents were killed, but that's like every story, according to this guy. But that weren't the premise of Jin. So Jin was a better character who had a better story, in my opinion.
Invasion of a nation.
And I will say, I'm pausing a lot, but I've got some things to say, of course. I do think the setting of Tsushima again was way better. Almost all cases of games and films set in Japan, it's around the time of when Ghost of Yotei is set, right? Like around the I'm trying to think of the name here. Sengoku era? Is that the name of it? I think that's the name of it, but I could be wrong on the name. But the setting around Ghost of Tsushima is the Mongolian invasion of Japan. We rarely ever see that. So I feel like the premise of Tsushima is way better and fresher.
With themes of honour, betrayal and belonging striking a chord and making it stand out when it arrived hot on the heels of The Last of Us Part 2 in 2020, before grief seemingly took hold of every Sony storyteller. Perhaps PlayStation's interest in grief is a reflection of the state of the world though. When viewed through the lens of when PS5 exclusives like Ghost of Yotei and Death Stranding were being written, that melancholy is somewhat understandable. The COVID pandemic inarguably took hold of our planet in the years 2020 and 2021. And as such, themes surrounding unexpected Ghost of Yotei and Death Stranding were being written.
Guys, I see it, and so do you.
That melancholy
we all
is
see
somewhat
it.
understandable. The COVID pandemic inarguably took hold of our planet in the years 2020 and 2021. And as such, themes surrounding unexpected loss and mass trauma would no doubt have been at the forefront of many minds. It will therefore be intriguing to see if this pattern will continue much further then, now that the world has somewhat settled back into what it looked like beforehand. Will the stories being told in projects that began production post-2022 mirror a different state of the planet? Or continue to look inside ourselves at our darkest moments? These are, of course, all valid tales to tell, and I'm a huge proponent of art being reflections of those creating it. But I can't help but wish for a little more variety going forward.
I will find every last member of the Yotei Six.
I mean, do you have any examples on how to change it then? Like, how do you build an interesting and relatable character if you're not going to use grief like at all? Like, how do you do that? This part I agree with. Like here, I do think there's too. I do think stories are going down the path of I'm going to avenge parents who were killed by, you know, him or her or whatever, right? But I feel like his entire premise here was about grief, which I don't know how you build interesting characters if you don't implement grief.
And I will bring you peace.
There's a reason to be hopeful and skeptical, considering what Sony has coming up next. Insomniac's Wolverine looks to be delivering on all of the gore and decapitation you'd hope to see, but will that mature rating be reflected in its themes?
Death's always waiting.
Logan is certainly a character consumed by lust for revenge. Will that see us taken down a familiar path of burying past demons through ultra-violence? Or will we get an altogether different story that taps into...
Guys, wasn't his story entirely about grief? Guys, I'm doing this a lot because it's kind of, let's see. Is the character of Wolverine built on grief? Yes, Wolverine's character is deeply rooted in grief. Deeply. Which is a core element of his identity across comics. Yeah, I think the story of this game is going to be tied to grief if the character is entirely tied to grief. So if you're hoping that this game isn't going to have grief, you're going to be a little disappointed.
To a different part of his psyche. James Mangold's Logan already told us a tale that would have slotted nicely into PlayStation's sad dad canon, as X-23 tapped into the softer side of his adamantium body. So I do hope we don't just get a rerun of that idea here. We also know that Saros is on the way from Housemarque in March, and it certainly looked impressive in the most recent State of Play stream. As for Naughty Dog, the ground zero of this long-running era of grief, we know that the studio will be taking on the sci-fi realm next with Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet.
I don't think this game's going to do too well. Unless the gameplay is like really fucking good. They made a big fucking mistake using this character. Why is she bald?
Its first trailer was promising, delivering a more fun-filled tone than we'd ever dream of seeing from the last.
All right. I think every positive thing he has said up until this point, who cares? If you think the first trailer to Intergalactic is promising, you're on some fucking copium. What trailer? Like, your criticism throughout this entire video was about how Sony is starting to lean into cinematic. Intergalactic trailer was entirely cinematic. How can you say, oh, this game could be different? No, it's going to be cinematic because the trailer was entirely cinematic.
Of us. Of course, we've barely scratched the surface here, but it would be fantastic to see Naughty Dog rediscovering some of that Uncharted levity here.
Yeah, for sure.
Both of these upcoming PS5 games, incidentally, are...
And also, in terms of Saros, who cares about the story? This game is supposed to be gameplay, only gameplay, with story like kind of on the side in the back end, kind of like Dark Souls, to where there is like some kind of lore and some kind of story, but who the fuck cares, right? It's all story, it's all gameplay.
Stories about people investigating lost off-world colonies. I hope for my sake that they find wildly different stories to tell on each of them, rather than discover reminders of the grief they've left behind.
But after every death, I always come back stronger.
For more on Ghost of Yotai, make sure to check out our review, and for everything else, keep it locked to IGN.
All right. Yeah. I think the only points I agree with is stories about avenging somebody, especially parents, is kind of cliche and dull. But the idea that grief is a part of the problem and is tied to Sony, I don't agree at all. I think grief is essential to creating characters. I feel like this entire thing, he said something, but then shortly after he contradicted it, like with the Astrobot, Uncharted, the Intergalactic, the Wolverine game coming out. I don't really even understand the premise of the video because it makes no sense. And it's easily disproven with games that came out like a couple of years prior. Right? guys, perhaps I didn't understand what he was talking about, and that's a possibility. Perhaps I'm just a fucking idiot. But from everything that I think I understand, I just don't agree. But I will say, I do think there's a big problem across the industries like film and game of incompetent writers. And the main reason is because people in their 30s and 40s, commonly known as millennials, they think they know better than everybody else. And every time they get their hands on something, what happens? They ruin it. Star Wars, Star Trek, The Witcher, if you've seen the TV show, Game of Thrones season 5 onwards. Let's see what else. Borderlands, the humor it's really fucking unfunny. Okay. Let's see. There's probably plenty of examples, but I can't think them off my head. But there's just some pretty big examples of incompetency. So I don't think grief. I don't even think avenging is entirely the sole problem. I think just incompetency is. People who don't know how to write it in an interesting way. People don't know how to tell it in an interesting way. That's the problem. But yeah. I'll like it because why not? But I don't entirely agree with a lot of what he said.